We're going to talk about natural gas tonight. It's kind of a natural extension of what I talked about last time, which is the electrical grid and the energy network. It's tightly connected to that subject, but it's not near, it doesn't have near as much pizzazz as the other one did. So anyway, I was wondering if anybody cared to show up, and I thank you for coming. I hope you'll enjoy it. It's an interesting story about Texas. Natural gas is a really important part of our economy here in the state, and it really is important as we want to bring in more renewables and end up reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So that's the story for tonight. Let me start kind of at the beginning and pretty basic. What is natural gas? It's a gas, and the primary chemical in it is methane, carbon with 4 hydrogens. Methane is about 90% of most of the natural gas that comes out of the ground, and the other 10% you're still familiar with. Carbon dioxide and water are in there, but there's a lot of stuff called NGLs, natural gas liquids. Think the propane in your barbecue grill, that white bottle that goes with your grill outside, that comes from natural gas. It's propane. We used to drill for natural gas in a typical vertical well. You drill straight down and you get to the formation and it produces and you get gas coming out. And a big part of this story is we had an improvement in the technology a few years ago where we now, almost all of our wells, we go straight down for a while and then we turn sideways. And we get a lot more exposure in this source rock, and so we have increased the amount of natural gas that we can produce in one well by using this new technology. Natural gas came from the remains of plants and animals back in the dinosaur age, and before that, leaves fell in the forests and plankton fell in the oceans, and they built up layers. Those got buried, and finally they came under high pressure and high temperature, and that converted some of those leaves and plankton into carbon compounds like natural gas and like oil. So that's how they came about. A couple of Chamber of Commerce slides to get this thing started. Texas is the energy state for sure. We produce about 43% of the crude oil in the United States, a quarter of the natural gas. And if you're looking for the other kinds of energy, for renewable energy, Texas is number one in both wind. Over a quarter of the wind energy in the United States is here in our state. And we're also number one in grid scale solar right now, and getting better all the time. We refine about a third of the oil in this country. We take crude oil and make gasoline and diesel fuel and other things out of it. We've got 32 oil refineries in the state, and we're about a third of the United States refining capacity. So it's a big deal for our industry. And here's the real Chamber of Commerce slide. It's got a huge amount of impact. Natural gas business alone in Texas is estimated to support 100,000 jobs. And those are typically really good jobs. Some of them pay over $100,000 a year, no college required, and those are the jobs that go out and do the drilling and the other support operations. So it's a big source of jobs in the state. It also produces 8% of our state's gross domestic product. In terms of the annual amount of money that oil and gas provide to things like schools, it's almost $7 billion in local property taxes that gets to the local school districts from oil and gas wells. The state gets money called a severance tax from the production of oil and gas, and that's almost $5 billion a year. And of that, about $300 million a year goes into the permanent university fund, and our favorite University of Texas gets 2/3 of that. So when you look over there on the campus, you see a new building going up, think natural gas. It also supports a lot of the downstream industry. I spent my work life in the chemical industry, and natural gas was a basic feedstock for that. And here lately, it's been a huge boom, or a help, not a boom, but a help to Europe, as they have had to get off from the use of Russian natural gas because of Ukraine and move to something else, and you'll see in a minute what they moved to is Texas natural gas. Big growth projections. Right now, nearly half of our electricity comes from natural gas, and that's way better than coal. It produces about half the emissions that coal does. If you look at it on a statewide level, the sales tax is our biggest source of revenue for Texas. We get a little more than half of our revenue from sales tax. The number 2 source of income for the state of Texas comes from oil and gas. All right, enough of the Chamber of Commerce slides. Here's a picture of the oil and gas wells in Texas. Every little blue dot that you can't even see because it's so fine represents the blue ones are oil wells and the red ones are gas wells. We've got about over 300,000 oil wells in Texas, and we've got almost 150,000 gas wells. They're all connected by pipelines, 34,000 miles of natural gas, 16,000 miles of crude oil pipelines. You'll see in a minute they're going all over the state. And the other thing that I hope leaps out to you with this chart is they're concentrated in certain areas. The biggest area is out here in West Texas, and that's called the Permian Basin. It extends over into New Mexico, and that is a huge source of oil and gas. We've also got some operations up in the Panhandle, some around Fort Worth. There's the original East Texas oil fields. And then you've got this swath along the Gulf Coast, and that's called the Eagle Ford Shale. And so those are the main geographic locations in Texas that both oil and gas are produced in. Here's where we are today with active drilling rigs. There's a picture of a drilling rig. It's a great big tower, and it's got a thing that turns the pipe up at the top. And you can see all of the pipes stacked up against her. They take them one by one and lift them up and screw them together and drill them down in the well, and that's a drilling rig. Right now there are 274 of those at work in Texas, drilling oil and gas. Almost all of them are going after oil. A few are going after natural gas. A lot of the oil wells also co-produce natural gas, and that will be a part of the story later on. And they're almost all, as you can see, those horizontal wells, like I showed you before. We've almost quit drilling the standard vertical wells. It's just so much better to go down and go sideways. The depth, you can see the depth of the wells. They go up to over 15,000 feet. And just to give you a benchmark, the distance from where we are right now to the Texas state capitol is about 3 miles, and that's about 15,000 feet. So these wells right here are as deep as from here to the Capitol building. That's how far underground they go. And you can see the rest of the numbers here. We're over half of the United States, and internationally it's about, 900 and something rigs working around the world right now. Oh, and here's, again, these are the active drilling rigs. Permian Basin, Panhandle, not too many out in East Texas right now. Some gas going into Louisiana, and then you've got the Eagle Ford Shale working down here. So there are active drilling rigs in all of those areas. I call this chart boom and bust in the oil patch. And if you've ever lived in Odessa like my friend Bill Clark over here has, you really understand boom and bust in the oil patch. When it's working, they're drilling a lot of wells, and it's a really big deal. And then the business collapses for a while, and everybody goes away. And if you own a motel or a restaurant in Odessa, you're in trouble for a while. So it goes up and down, up and down. That's 2007 until today. And you can see how we have moved more and more to these horizontal wells. And anyway, that's about where we are right now, drilling rates. And it's a boom and bust business. Here's a little history of how much we produced. Going all the way back to the 1930s, we started producing gas. And it came out pretty easy, and we got up in the, late 60s to a peak. And then it started getting harder and harder to find gas. And we started to produce less and less. And that became a problem because we started to use it to make electricity and other things, and we needed some more. So we increased our, it cost us more and more to drill, so the price went up. This is the price chart. So the price started going up from $3 a million BTU almost to 3 times that, and that was sufficient for a little while to cause some more gas to be produced because we were willing to spend 3 times as much on a well. And then something happened that made a really big difference. We invented some new technology. We invented horizontal drilling and fracking. We'll talk some more about that in a minute. And what that did is all of a sudden we could go way up in our production, and it was so cheap to do it because of this drilling technology that the price went back down again. And so here we are back to that $3 a million price, and yet we're producing way more than we ever have before. And that's because of the fracking technology. Here's a story about the Permian Basin. And again, it's the predominant oil and gas producer in the United States. This is a percent of the United States over here. And you can see oil. This is from the 1950s until today. We used to make 10% of the oil in Texas, and now we're up almost 50. Natural gas has gone up to about a quarter. And that's basically in the Permian Basin. And you can see that it laps over into Louisiana a little bit. Okay, what do we do with the natural gas that we make? Well, half of it we send out, 55% of it we export. It goes across our state lines, and it either goes to other states or to Mexico or someplace else. It's exported. The other half we use inside of Texas, and it's kind of interesting when you look at that. The bulk of it goes for industrial applications and for making electricity. And we use about 6% of the natural gas just to produce the gas and to move it around through the pipelines. We only use 2% in our homes. Only 2% of the natural gas made in Texas is in cook stoves and home heaters, and only 2% is in commercial buildings. Like we heat with natural gas here in Westminster, a lot of people do, but that's a very small piece of the total production in natural gas. Okay, let's talk about distribution. This is a pipeline map. We got lots of pipelines all over the place. There are 2 basic kinds of pipelines. The ones that are called interstate are shown in red, and those are the pipelines that only work inside of Texas. They are free from some federal regulations because they do that. But because we export so much, we also have to have exporting pipelines, and so the blue ones are the interstate pipelines, the ones that end up going across the border. And there's an important place out near Fort Stockton. It's like a natural hub for all that West Texas gas. All the pipelines come together in a spot, and then if you want to go someplace, you take out from that hub and go out someplace else. And it's named the Waha Hub. And I looked real hard to try to figure out what Waha means, and I was unsuccessful, so I cannot tell you what WAHA stands for, but it's the Waha Hub in Fort Stockton that's big. Okay, now I want to talk about liquefied natural gas, LNG, because that's become one of our big deals. I put a Texas flag on that ship because most of it comes from here. And so this stuff gets shipped all over this country and the world. It's liquefied. You take a pipeline, you take the natural gas, you put it into some equipment, and make it really, really cold, and it turns into a liquid. And you can store that liquid in a special tank, and you can either store it or you can put it on ships and ship it all over the world. So that's LNG, liquefied natural gas. Before 2016, the United States disallowed exporting of natural gas. It was illegal for us to export natural gas. That law changed in 2016, and our businesses took advantage of that and started building facilities to liquefy the gas and started selling it. And so this bottom line there, that's the exports by pipeline. And that's, that's grown a little bit, but not a whole lot. The top lighter blue line is the LNG, and it started from 0 in 2016, and it's now up to more than we ship out by pipeline. A little more than half of that comes from Texas, and Louisiana is a little more than a third. And so Texas and Louisiana, which you would expect because that's where the gas wells are, that's where the sources of LNG are from. This is a busy chart, but I think I can summarize it. It's the exports by country. And since 2016, the little Middle Eastern country or nation of Qatar was the predominant LNG supplier to the world. And then other countries came along. Australia started doing it. They got up pretty big. Russia got into the business. They came up a little bit. Malaysia did. But here is the United States. We started from 0, and we worked our way all the way up. And right now, the United States is the largest exporter of natural gas in the world. And again, the bulk of that comes from Texas. So who are our customers? Prior to 2022, our biggest customers were in Asia. You can see here's a 2021 chart, and this is the amount that went to Asia. China and South Korea were the two biggest. And in 2021, this is how much we sent to Europe, less than we sent to Asia. All that changed when Russia invaded Ukraine, because all of a sudden Europe decides it can't rely on Russia for gas, so they quit taking it from Russia, and they needed it, so the United States started supplying it. And so last year, our exports to Asia have gone down substantially, but look how much they've grown to Europe. So right now, more than half of the natural gas, the LNG that we sell, goes to Europe. Here's a chart that shows you where the LNG facilities are located. There are a couple of small ones over here on the East Coast, but far and away they're in Texas and Louisiana. And here's a blow-up of that chart. We've got Freeport. You can't see it on this chart, but down around Brownsville there's some going in. And then Golden Pass is basically Port Arthur. Sabine Pass is the same area. Freeport is in there. And then over in Louisiana we've got Cameron and Calcasieu. So those are the physical locations, and they're all on the coast, which you'd expect. So the pipelines bring the gas into those locations, and then the new facilities liquefy it and put it on ships and send it out. Here's a chart of where they come from. This starts again in 2016, because that's when we began. And these are the different facilities. You can see the two little ones on the East Coast. Here's Sabine Pass, Corpus Christi, Freeport, that's Texas, Cameron and Calcasieu, Louisiana. These are the new ones that are under construction. Golden Pass is at Port Arthur, basically. Corpus Christi has got a new one going in, and there's one going in Plaquemines. Had an important event that happened at the first part of this year. The Department of Energy put a great big pause on all this. And so it is now not okay, it's not legal to begin construction of a new natural gas liquefaction facility because of the DOE not approving them. I don't know how long that lasts. I think it's just an election year kind of a thing. Maybe it'll go away. But the fact is, right now, we are not allowed to begin any new facilities. We are allowed to complete these here that are under construction. Here's an interesting one that's working. I think it looks like it's going to happen. This is an export of natural gas from Texas. It's going to end up being LNG. And what they're going to build is a pipeline from that Waha hub I told you about in Fort Stockton, a brand new pipeline to the Rio Grande, where it's going to connect up to an existing Mexican pipeline and go all the way over to the Gulf of California. And the reason for that is, if you can start your shipping here, it's a whole lot easier to get to Asia from here, crossing the Pacific, than it is to come out of the Gulf of Mexico and go all the way around through the Panama Canal or wherever you have to go. So this is going to be probably a pretty big deal. We have basically approved the pipeline. It's 155 miles. It's going to be 4 feet in diameter. That's pretty big. It's going to be the 6th largest natural gas line. It's going to cost about $10 million to build. And again, it's going to be liquefied over here and shipped to Asia. The Railroad Commission and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the two governmental bodies that have to produce it, have to approve it, have already done so. So it's been approved, and it's likely to be built. And the LNG facility over here, just last week or 2 weeks ago, this company called Sonora Pacific LNG, they're based in Houston, they have just approved a $15 billion project to build that facility over here. So it looks to me like it's likely that this is going to happen. And that will be another big export of Texas natural gas that ends up in Asia. Call this a Saguaro pipeline. Here's some economics if you want to get a feel for why people are doing this. Now, this is basically today, and that's the European natural gas price chart. You can see they were down here pretty low, and they went up for a while, and then here's the Ukraine invasion, and it really shot up very high in Europe until we got the LNG going over, and now it's gone back down again. But if you start from where we are today, that's this line over here. And these are just round numbers, but you can buy the natural gas out of a pipeline here in the United States for $2 a million BTU, which is a heat unit that you measure natural gas in. It costs you another $2 to turn it into liquid. And it costs you $1.50 to ship it to Europe. And so you can land it in Europe and get it delivered to Europe for $4.50. Then you have to turn it from a liquid back to a gas again, so you can put it in the European pipeline. That costs another $1. And so now you're ready to sell it in Europe, and your cost basis is $5.50 a million BTU, and the market price is $9. And so it's pretty easy to see that margin, which is why there's so much economic interest in people building facilities and taking natural gas from Texas and sending it to Europe for sale. Okay, I know you just couldn't wait to talk about the issues, because there are some, and they're important. And I put them in 3 categories. This has got to do with basically natural gas, mostly the production side of it. There's the flaring and venting issues, and then there's the basic fracking, and then there's the fact that it ends up causing earthquakes. None of those things are particularly good. And so let's talk about them a little bit. Here's flaring. If you've ever driven through West Texas, and I imagine most of you have, you'll see a flare, some gas burning out of a flare next to some facilities. And this is a 2012 satellite picture looking down for light. It's looking for where the light is in Texas. And sure enough, Dallas and Houston are lit up pretty good. You can see Austin and even the I-35 corridor to San Antonio. So there's, Beaumont. You can see all the cities. I think that must be Lubbock. I don't know. Anyway, you can see the cities. But look at this down here between the red, between those two red lines, that line right there. There aren't any cities of any note in that area. All that light are natural gas flares. And it was big in 2012. And it's gotten better. We'll look at that in a minute. But it's still pretty big. So there's a lot of flaring going on. Why do we do it? 3 main reasons. It's a safety reason. If you got a pipeline you're working and the pressure starts to get too high, you can't have that happen. And so in order to control the pressure in a pipeline, you let some go out to a flare. So it's a safety issue to flare. Bigger than that, though, are the next 2 items, and that is if you drill a well for oil and you strike oil and begin to produce it, and gas comes up with the oil, and you don't have a pipeline to send that natural gas to market, you have no choice but to put it in a flare. Because you want the oil, you get the gas, comes with it, and if you don't have any way to sell it, you flare it. So that's another reason, no pipeline to market. And then the one that's related to that is the oil is worth more than the gas. So if you got this well that makes both, you want to produce the well to get the oil, and you have to get rid of the gas. So if you can't sell it, you flare it. That's why we do it. And there are at least 2 big problems with flaring, and venting, by the way, is where you just put it out into the air without burning it. And that's much worse than flaring. And we don't do much of it. But flaring and venting have these problems. First of all, it's a valuable resource, and it's just wasting it. You're just burning it up. And the second thing is it does make greenhouse gas emissions, and that contributes to global warming, and we don't like that. And there are 2 kinds of emissions when you flare. You get the carbon dioxide that comes just from burning it, and that's bad. And then you have some methane itself that goes out, and that's bad too. And here's just a couple of facts that put this into perspective. Right now, Texas is flaring more natural gas than residents are using in their homes across the whole state. That's where we are right now. And in 2019, in the Permian Basin, somebody calculated that we burned up $750 million worth of natural gas in flares. So you look at that and you kind of say, oh, that's not too good. Why are we doing that? And it's a problem. So we're working on that. Let me show you the methane story, because it's kind of interesting. This chart is the methane concentration in the air, and it's parts per billion. And for many, many years, we were down here at about 700 parts per billion. It just, it wiggled a little bit naturally, but that's where it was. All of a sudden, when we got to the Industrial Revolution, that started going up, and it went up like a rocket, and it's still going up. And here's a little subset of that same chart. This is from, about 1980 to today. And you can see how the methane concentration has continued to go up, 18% in the last 35 years. And we currently estimate that nearly 1/3 of the global warming we have right now is coming from this methane that's in the atmosphere. So that's a problem. Now, it's not, the methane up there is not just from gas wells, far from it. So this chart tries to show you that. Not quite half of the methane in the atmosphere is totally natural. Wetlands naturally produce methane. Been doing it forever, still are. There are other natural emissions. One that I find interesting, we don't have too many termite mounds in the United States, but if you've ever been to Africa, you see those great big termite mounds. There must be a good reason, but termites produce methane. And you wouldn't believe it, but they're a significant source of the natural methane in the atmosphere. But that's not all. Agriculture is the biggest domestic source, or man-made source. And you've all heard about the cow burps. That's what that's all about. When a cow burps and does other things, methane comes out and that goes into the air. That's a part of the story. Here's our fossil fuels. This is oil and gas, and that's about 22% of the human emissions. And there's some more, but there's a good news story associated with that, and that is the chemistry of it is such that methane fairly rapidly, naturally decomposes in the air. The natural half-life of methane in the air is 7 years. And so most of it just goes away naturally. It decomposes in the air. It's no longer methane, no longer a problem with global warming. So that's good. Some of it sinks into the soils, and it's almost a balance between how much gets emitted and how much gets reduced. But right now there's a little left over, 10 out of 550. And that's why, that 10 is why the concentration has been going up. But again, the half-life is only 7 years. So that means that if we can do something to affect how much we're emitting here in fossil fuels and what we're doing over here in agriculture, we can make enough difference to change this equation. And that's why you see a lot of interest and a lot of work in trying to reduce these methane emissions. Most of it is just focused on the oil and gas industry because they're easy and they're big and they've got money to do something. So that's where you see the majority of the focus. Some people talk about don't eat steak anymore, but you know, I kind of like it when I go to the restaurant here in Westminster, so that's another story. Okay, here we started putting up satellites to specifically look for methane. So we're gathering some data so we know where it's coming from. And this is a chart from 2019. And you know, guess what? There's the Permian Basin. It stands out pretty big. That's methane coming out of West Texas. You got a little up here in the Panhandle. There's your East Texas fields. There's a lot of natural gas produced in Pennsylvania. It's called the Marcellus field. So that's natural gas in Pennsylvania. And then you got all these other sources that are landfills and city dumps and other places where methane comes from. So there have been some reduction. It's kind of slow, but you can see the numbers here. We are slowly reducing the amount of methane that we're emitting, and that's going in the right direction. Okay, that's this chart. Making progress, but slowly. All the way back in 1996, the Texas Railroad Commission, who regulates this stuff, they passed a rule that said if you are prohibited from flaring natural gas back in 1996. But they said, well, we have to have some exceptions. And the biggest exception is you drill a well, it co-produces natural gas with oil, you don't have a place to put it, there's no pipeline, and you could get an exception to flare it in that situation. And we did for a number of years. And we got all the way up to 2019, we had almost 7,000 exemptions granted to allow flaring to take place. And about that same point in time, we started to become aware of this issue and to begin to do something about it. We tightened up our rules for the Railroad Commission. We're down to about half the number of permits now. We still allow that to happen, but it's going in the right direction. This is a chart that I know you can't read the numbers, but just look at that bottom one right there. That is the percentage of natural gas produced in Texas that is flared. It used to be less than 1%. It got all the way up to over 2% of the natural gas that we produce is flared. That was in that 2019 period. And we've now got it back down to under 1. So we're going in the right direction with the work that we have done over the last just few years. The issue is with the smaller operators. All your big major operators, Exxon and all those people that operate out there, they have already done the things to avoid flaring. They put in the pipelines, they built the facilities, and so they are no longer the ones who are doing most of the flaring. It is the smaller operators who can't afford to do what they've done that are still doing the flaring, but it's still happening. And just earlier this year, we put a new rule in EPA that's monitoring emissions. We're spending a lot more money on just looking for where are the emissions. So if we can see, that's what these satellite things are doing. We can already do it to a degree, but we will be able to see a leak from a natural gas pipeline that no human even knows exists. Out in the middle of somewhere, a leak might erupt and people don't even know what happened. But these satellites are going to be able to spot it and tell somebody, you better go fix that leak. We're beginning to do that right now. So that's another good news story that's headed. And I say again, we're lucky because of this 7 years. This is a problem that we can fix. And we haven't fixed it yet, but we are aware of it and we're moving towards fixing it. Methane half-life is 7 years, takes 120 years for the carbon dioxide to disintegrate in the air. And so this is a positive story. We can solve that problem. Now here's an interesting statistic that tells you about the nature of the market today. This is a price chart. And it's back out at that Waha hub I told you about. And this is the price over here. There's a zero price, and there's $2. That's dollars per million BTU, and it was positive before this year, $2 to $3. It spikes up every once in a while. But look what's happened in 2024. The price has gone below zero for the most of this year. Still is right now. You say, well, how can that be, or why is that? What that means is if you're a natural gas producer in West Texas and you bring up oil and natural gas comes with it and you can't sell that natural gas, you're obliged to find something to do with it. So you basically pay somebody to take it. So it's a negative price. If you're the producer, you have to pay as much as $2 for a couple of periods this year. And get somebody else to take it to make it go away. The fact that that negative price exists is an economic indication that these regulations that we have to avoid flaring are beginning to work. It's just an interesting thought. A lot of utilities out in West Texas that have pretty easy access and don't need a lot of pipeline, they really make some cheap electricity when they get money for the natural gas that they burn and make electricity out of. Okay, we've beat ourselves up quite a bit about how badly we're doing with all this flaring and venting, but put it in perspective for a little bit. Here's the total natural gas flared in 2023. We flared a bunch, 1% of the world's total, 2% of the world's total, 1% of how much we produced in Texas, and 2% of the world's total flaring was in Texas. Look at one country, Venezuela. They don't have a natural gas market, so they're producing oil, gas comes with it, they're flaring more than half of what they make. There's the world. So if you put things into perspective, you can say, well, yeah, we have a problem and we should be doing something about it, and we are, but we are far and away from the biggest problem. All right, let's shift subjects and go to our other favorite subject. This is fracking. What is fracking? it is technology that you can use when you drill a well, and it involves, it's called fracture formation. So what you do is you drill down, you turn sideways, and you go through this, let's call it shale or source rock, the geographic formation that has the oil and gas in it. You go through that, and then you inject water and sand under extremely high pressures. And what that does is it goes out and causes cracks in that shale, in that rock, that black hard rock down there. It fractures the rock. That's where fracking comes from. And in so doing, the little sand particles go into the cracks, and when you remove the water, it holds the cracks open, and that allows the gas and the oil to flow out of that rock and get into the wellbore and be produced. So that's what fracking is all about. Why is it controversial? There are three reasons, in my opinion, why it's so controversial. The first reason is it's really very effective in terms of increasing oil and gas production. And that's controversial because a lot of people think we should not be producing any oil and gas at all. And they're very much opposed to anything which allows that to happen. So that's a reason for controversy to a lot of people. And those are the folks who give you the frack off sign every once in a while. The other reasons, which are very valid, are it takes a whole lot of water to frack a well. We'll look at that some more in a minute. And when you dispose of the water, as well as the other water that comes out later when you're producing it, you have to put that water somewhere. Right now we're re-injecting it into deep wells, and that's causing earthquakes, and that's a problem. So meet Nick Steinsberger. He worked for Mitchell Petroleum back in 1998, and he was in charge of drilling a well up by Fort Worth. And he got all the way down into that rock, and he produced a little gas, but it wasn't near as much as he thought it should have been. So he said, I think I'm going to try this new stuff they're talking about called fracking. So he arranged for some equipment to come out. They fracked his well up there. It worked. The gas started flowing out of the well, and ever since then, that's been the thing to do. So George Mitchell owned Mitchell Petroleum, obviously, and he's known as the father of fracking. I don't know how well he likes that title, but that's what people call him. That's a picture of what it looks like. It is a massive operation when you frack one of these wells. You've got all this, you've got big tanks of water, you got all these pumps and stuff that back up. They put that water and sand into the well, and it goes down, and it is a major operation to do a fracking job on a well. Okay, let's talk about earthquakes. The blue line down here and the little blue dots on that chart are earthquakes before fracking. And there were a few. And as you can see, they were kind of scattered all over. And along comes fracking. And it's not the fracking that causes the earthquake, it's the fact that the water that comes out afterwards gets re-injected. And that's what caused it. But it's because we fracked the well. And look what happened. All of a sudden, the earthquakes went way up. The United States Geographic Survey says that most of them are fairly small. They're 3 to 4 in magnitude. If you're standing on the ground where there's one of them, they say you can feel it a little bit, but it's not enough to cause any damage. That's the majority of the earthquakes. And here's the earthquake story. They shot way up before we quite realized what was going on. And once we figured out what was going on, we started to do something about it. And so we have, in fact, reduced the number of earthquakes, but they are still occurring. And as a matter of fact, if you've been paying attention in the last month in the news, there's a big story about a whole flurry of earthquakes that just took place last month in Scurry County, Texas. There's a picture of that area. The town of Snyder is kind of at the middle of that. And what happened is there were 2 water disposal wells that were working in Scurry County. They were deep. The company that was operating them thought that they might have better luck with earthquake reduction if they moved up to the next level and injected the water at a little higher level. They thought it would be positive. So they made the move, and it was a mistake. It started causing this. I mean, there were dozens of them. I read about it in the paper. One of them got up to a magnitude of 5. And it said that there are a few houses in Snyder that actually had the sheetrock in the wall crack a little bit. I think there was one water main in the city of Snyder that actually burst. So the earthquakes did cause some damage, and that was because of fracking. Those 2 wells have been shut down and disallowed by the Railroad Commission. And that's another positive story that we're doing lately to try to get a handle on this. Okay, fracking uses a lot of water. 3 to 7 billion gallons of water is required for one frack treatment. That's the first one on a well, and some wells have to have more than one. So there's a whole lot of water that gets used. So how do you put that into perspective? The amount of water that's used is 0.1% of the fresh water in the entire United States. Watering golf courses uses 3 times as much water as fracking does. But it is 10% of the tap water in Texas. So it's not insignificant, but you have to put it in this perspective to see how well. The biggest problem is not the fracking water. You know, you put the water in, you frack the well, then you let the pressure go and it starts to produce. The first thing that comes back is this so-called flowback water. That's what they call it out in the oil patch. And that's the fracked water that you put in. It flows back and you have to get rid of it. So it's gone, and now you're producing your well, but it's still generating salty water, it's brine. But a whole lot of natural water down there comes out with your oil and gas. We call that produced water, and that produced water you have to do something with. And right now, we're sticking it back down in a disposal well. We're making progress on doing something about that. Last year, about half of the frack water we needed, we used recycled produced water instead of fresh water. So we're beginning to not use any more fresh water for fracking. We're using produced water. That's good. We'll be doing more of that as they develop the technology. But it doesn't solve the issue. In some of these wells, you get 5 barrels of salt water for every barrel of oil. And all that salt water, brine, something has got to be done with that. And right now, it's stuck down in disposal wells. And here, and we'll probably get close, but once we don't use fresh water for fracking anymore, we use this recycled produced water, there will still be millions of barrels of water that we've got to get rid of. We're trying to figure out what to do with that. It's not, some of it is not bad water. And in California and other places are actually using some of it to grow crops. And we're looking for what can we do with this stuff other than put it down a hole. And we're going. The Railroad Commission has started stopping disposal wells that are doing things they shouldn't. They started last year. They've shut in several wells out in the Midland, Odessa area, some near Stanton. There's the ones they just did in Scurry County. So we're beginning to recognize when a disposal well is causing earthquakes, and we're shutting it down. Okay, we're down just about to the end now. So this is kind of the bottom line. Why do we need natural gas for the power grid? And this is the chart I'm going to show you is from last month's talk. But it's really pretty simple. It's to keep the lights on when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. And here is the chart that shows you that. This was February the 12th of this year. It was a mild day, wasn't really hot, wasn't really cold. We had no problem making all the electricity we needed, so we weren't about to run out of power. But here's where the power came from on that day. At noon, we had really good renewables. We got about half of our power at noon on that day from wind and solar, and the rest of it comes from natural gas, coal, and nuclear, those things that we think we want to get rid of. But what happened just a few hours later, the sun set and the wind died down, and at 8 o'clock on this very same day, we were only making 5% of our electricity from wind and solar. And had we not had natural gas, we would have been in a world of hurt. And if you want to expand the use of electricity, which we're doing, you really, that'll be fine, you know, at noon on a sunny day like today. But if you ever want to have the lights on when the sun's down and the wind's not blowing, you better have plenty of natural gas to be able to generate your power. So that's the end of my story for today. I thank you for your interest, and I'd love to try to field any questions. Yes, ma'am.
How long is it estimated that natural gas will last?
The question is, how long do we estimate natural gas will last? I've never seen a specific number, but it's a long time. Texas has a lot of natural gas reserves. We're barely even going after it on purpose now. So we've got enough natural gas to last quite a while. I don't know the number, but it's a long time. I'll answer it this way. It's plenty of time for us to finally figure out we need nuclear power and move into that. But we haven't figured it out yet, but we will one day. And the natural gas will take us to that point in time. Yes, sir.
What is the process for liquefying natural gas to LNG?
What is the process for liquefying natural gas to LNG? You put it in a, how can I say this? I used to work right next to one. You put it in a little chemical plant, and you use a lot of electricity to cool it. And you cool it, first you cool the gas, it's like minus 250 degrees Fahrenheit, really cold. And when you get it down to that temperature, it turns into a liquid. And then you've got really cold liquid natural gas. And if you have a good enough, well-insulated tank, you can store it and ship it and do things with it. So that's a real layman's explanation of how you do it.
So it can be stored
Yes.
before it goes onto a ship.
Yes, and it is stored on the ship. If you remember that picture of
Right.
the ship I showed you, the ships are designed like a big storage tank. And we have tanks full of natural gas all around right now. They're very well insulated tanks, but it works. Behind you in the back.
What if that briny water was put into a lake? Would it eventually become salt?
No, brine is salt water. And the question is, and it's liquid. It's like, you know, I put a
Yes.
teaspoon of salt in my glass here. And so it's a liquid. And it depends on the concentration of the brine. If it is just a little bit salty, you can put it in a lake and nothing will happen. It'll just be very dilute salt in the water. But if it's like most of it is, it's too salty to drink, so you wouldn't want to put it in a lake. So you have to find something else to do with it.
I didn't mean put it into an existing lake. I meant make a lake.
Okay, that's
Put
called solar evaporation, and that works. You can do it, and you can create a lake, and you can pump it full of brine and let the sun evaporate the water, and it will ultimately make salt. They actually used to make salt like that. So that will work. But we have so much of it that you have to make the whole state of Texas into a lake to be able to work it. It's way too much to do that way, but that would work on a smaller scale. Question over here.
It must be expensive for these companies to make these improvements that makes it a lot safer. What motivates them to do that?
They make money at it. Same thing that motivates them. The
No,
price
I-
goes up. They spend the money to do these. Exxon, well, Oxy is a better example. Oxy, I forgot the name of it. They've got a facility out in West Texas where they bring in all the natural gas, and they knock out the LNGs and they put it in pipelines. That's very expensive. What it means is they have to charge more for the natural gas they sell. So our price is going up a little bit, and that is giving them the money to go do the things that they're doing to help.
So they're just doing it out of the kindness of their hearts?
No, they're making money at it. They're businesses. They're not,
Regulations, right?
they're not doing it for feel good. They're doing it to make money. They're businesses. Yes.
Is there an explainable reason why the salt water can't be used initially to be pumped in that tubing and I guess the mud engineers kind of part?
Yeah, she's asking why can't you use the brine, the produced water, the salt water, to provide water for the fracking operation? I think that's your question. And the answer, yeah, you can do it. Half of the fracking water we used last year was in fact from produced water. And we're rapidly moving to more and more. So we can see that in not very many years, most of the water we use for fracking will be produced water. That's good. The problem is there's a lot more produced water than we need for that. And we got to do something with that. That's where the issue is. Another question over here.
A long time ago, I worked for H.B. Zachary Construction Company, and they had a pipeline division. And I've been sitting here thinking about that saguaro pipeline, 4-foot inside diameter pipe. That is a very big ditch,
Yes, it is.
and that's a lot of miles to go across the country of Mexico.
155 in this case.
Is it going to be underground or
Yes.
above ground or
Underground.
both?
Big ditch, underground.
Jim, tell me, I'm gonna have to report to my family trust that I've heard your oil story. Tell me about your background. What made you, are you an oil professional?
I spent the majority of my life working in a chemical plant, and we used oil and gas products, and so I worked with them every day. I've never worked out in the oil field, but I've been around it all my life, and I'm interested in it. So that's my background.
Yeah, Jim, the pipeline and most long-distance pipelines, what pressure do they operate on? They're not liquefied, but I know that some of them are very high pressure.
Yeah, it varies, but between 1,000 and 2,000 pounds per square inch is a typical. That's a lot of pressure. But that's pretty typical. I don't know about these big lines, the smaller ones. You know, it gets harder when the line gets bigger. But say 1,500 psi is not unusual for a pipeline.
You know, one blew out under Galveston Bay, oh goodness, this was back in the 90s, and you could hear it several miles away.
Oh yeah, it whistles. Yes, sir.
Mexican pipeline already 4 feet diameter?
I don't know how big the Mexican pipeline is. that seems awful big, but it's gotta be pretty big or they wouldn't be making one that big to get it there. So I can't answer how big the Mexican line is, but it must be pretty big, or either that or they're gonna run it under high pressure. Because it's gotta move all that gas to the Baja. One more question, that's the last question. What is it?
I have to ask, are we encouraging Asian purchasing of our,
Is that something we're thinking we're maybe not going to be doing as much business with, like China? Or are there other purchasers on that?
There are other purchasers, I don't know that we'll, you know, it's all politics as to who you decide, whether you want to sell to China or not. A lot of that's political, but the business is there, and that's clearly a more obvious shipping thing, and so we'll sell, you know, if you're in business and you can do it, you'll sell to whoever's got the money to buy it from you.
That raised another question to me. You showed how Asian demand has gone down. Is that because they're buying it from Russia?
Russia and Qatar and those others, they're buying it. They're still importing a lot. That was how much we're selling them, not how much they're using. They're still using a lot. They're just giving it to somebody else. Okay, thank you.